So I think I'll get us started. I'm sure some other people will dial in as we go. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Christopher Smith, JD class of 2014, and I'm president of the Vermont Law School Alumni Association. Unfortunately, but for a global pandemic, many of us would be in South Royalton right now enjoying Alumni Weekend. More specifically, we'd be finishing up the Leaders Circle breakfast and going into Yates Common Room to hear the discussion of the State of VLS. But since our community can't come together in South Royalton, we thought it would be a good idea to bring our community to you and have those same discussions. And anything we discuss today will cover from where the school's at now, how we got here, and where we're heading. And none of it's possible without the support of alumni. So I'll just ask, to the extent you are able, please consider going to connect.vermontlaw.edu and making whatever contribution you can, even if it's $5. Because as I like to say, it matters as much how many people give as how much each person gives. And with that, I'll hand things over to Richard Sala, JD and MELP class of 2013, and member of the Board of Directors of the Vermont Law School Alumni Association, to facilitate the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Richard?
Hey, thank you so much, Christopher. I'm looking at the participant numbers climbing over there, so I'm glad to see that. We only have about an hour, so I'm gonna get right to it. I just want to thank everybody for being here. Please remember to keep your mics muted. Just take a second now. If you haven't, just make sure that your mic is muted. If you have questions along the way, please just go ahead and type them right into the chat. As I see them populate there, I'll ask them to the appropriate faculty member. We have a lot of faculty members with us here today. We have President and Dean Tom McHenry. We have from the Board of Trustees, we have Constance Neary. The Vice President for Finance, Lorraine Atwood, is here. Director of Academic Success, Joe Brennan. Director of the National Center of Restorative Justice, Stephanie Clark. Director of Human Resources, Betsy Irwin. Vice President for Alumni Relations and Development, Brooke Herndon. Associate Dean for Student Affairs and Diversity, Dean Shirley Jefferson. Vice Dean for Faculty, Cynthia Lewis. Vice Dean for Students, Beth McCormick. Vice President for Enrollment Management, Marketing, and Communications, John Miller. The VLSAA President, who's already introduced himself, Christopher Smith, and Associate Dean for Environmental Programs, Jenny Rushlow. And, you know, over the last couple of years, we've met many times to discuss tough decisions that we've had to make. And we've, talked about that, I think, quite extensively. And today is really about, I think, turning the page and talking to the alumni about what we're doing going forward. And so that is the way that we're going to push the conversation today. I have a series of questions that I've already received from some of the alumni, so thank you for that. I'll make sure to get to those. If for some reason the way I address them doesn't answer your question, again, please feel free to put that in the chat. And so what we're going to do in a second is we're going to go through several of our programs, about 7 different programs. And we're going to start with the Restorative Justice Program, but just talking about what we've done, talent that we've added to those programs, initiatives we've undertaken. But before we do that, I'm going to start with the first question that I received in preparation for today, which actually came from Christopher Smith. And he had directed his question directly to Joe Brennan, to Brooke Herndon, and to Jenny Rushlow. And that question is, since joining the faculty at Vermont Law School, what's been your favorite thing about being on campus? And I think, if it's okay, we'll start with Joe Brennan on this question.
Hi. Thanks, Richard. Good morning. I'm Joe Brennan, the Director of Academic Success. Been here since 2015, and really excited to see a lot of you today. This is exciting to see some faces. My favorite thing about being on campus is I take a lot of walks. It's a beautiful campus to walk around, and not only do I get the fun of walking around, I get more done walking around than I do sitting at my desk, because it's such the nature of the town and the nature of the campus. People come up to you, they chat. I see people who might not have otherwise come to me, and just in those couple seconds of conversation can further that relationship and move it on. I do have to make sure that I have plenty of time for my walks, because a distance that normally might take me 20 minutes could end up taking 45 minutes with stops. And I always have to make sure to leave early for class, because it takes forever for me to get across campus. But I love every second of seeing everyone on campus, and having people point out to me that I always wear an orange hat in the winter, and they like seeing me when I walk by their property classroom in Oaks 007.
Thanks, Joe. Jenny.
Good morning. Great to be with you all. This is a great question. I think I would say the people. I've been at VLS for about 2 years now, a little under 2 years. And I have just been so amazed at the kindness and genuine character of everybody that I encounter that works at Vermont Law School. It makes it a true pleasure to walk down the hall and, get into conversation, even casual conversation with everyone that you meet. And so that's something that, coming up here from the city with a different legal community and environment is something that I've just really loved. Also, when I do get to go outside and walk between buildings, I would say at least half the time I look up and there's an absolutely breathtaking view of the mountains. I have a gorgeous view from my office that just can't be beat. And so I think that cuts the stress significantly, just to be able to look out and see what a beautiful place it is.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Brooke?
I think my favorite part is interacting with the students. Much like people have said before, getting out of the office and interacting. And I remember my first week here, I was trying to find the IT department, and I must have looked lost, because a student, Jameson, actually came up to me and he said, "Do you need help?" And I was just overwhelmed with, comfort that he was willing to not only tell me where to go, but show me and bring me there. So he took that extra effort to make me feel more comfortable and less lost. And I also have enjoyed the dean's hikes to Kent's Ledge. And being with the students. I'm sort of an exercise junkie, so any opportunity I can get to, do a brisk walk in the morning, and especially that hike has been wonderful. And being in Vermont, I didn't grow up here. I'm not originally from here. Lived here as a child on a dairy farm. But the interesting note is that I have great grandparents that are buried in the cemetery that I could almost see from my office in Riverview Cemetery in South Royalton. So I feel like a big part of me is coming home. And that's what I love most about Vermont Law School.
Thank you so much. Okay, we got that first question to get that icebreaker out of the way. And now I think what we're going to do is go ahead and start by just giving the floor over to Stephanie Clark to talk about the restorative justice program.
Thank you, Richard. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I have to say, it's such a pleasure to see so many faces and everyone smiling. And, VLS is such a wonderful family and community, and I'm just really pleased to be able to share some exciting news about the Restorative Justice Program with you this morning. There's a few things I'll touch on. The first is just the educational program. The Master of Arts in Restorative Justice Program is truly one of a kind. We are the only law school in the country that offers a Master of Arts in Restorative Justice. We also have a professional certificate program, and while some other schools are starting to bring out a professional certificate, none of them have the breadth and the depth of the curriculum that we offer. Students in our program can choose from over 30 courses. They also have an externship opportunity so they can do experiential learning. There's great opportunities for restorative justice work that's happening in Vermont and around the country. So whether we have students that are online or on campus, we can create those opportunities for them. From the very beginning, it was very intentional to build our program to be available both online and on campus. So even in this particular moment in time, we were particularly easing into the transition because we already had everything available online and on campus. We also have just outstanding faculty from around the country. So they are expert practitioners and scholars in the restorative justice field. And so truly our program is unparalleled in the United States. So the other very exciting recent news that I hope you've already heard about is that we've received a $3 million federal grant from the Bureau of Justice Assistance. This federal grant partners us with University of Vermont and University of San Diego to create the National Center on Restorative Justice. It is such an exciting opportunity to continue to look at our educational program at the graduate level. We're going to be doing a course mapping and a curriculum evaluation that will also expand what we're already offering. But in addition to that, we're going to be doing educational opportunities with people that are system involved. So we'll be providing education for people that are in treatment courts. We'll also be offering educational opportunities for people that are in facilities right now. So University of Vermont has the Liberal Arts in Prison program that already exists in the women's facility in Vermont. That program is going to be extrapolated out into the men's facility, and there will be a data and research overlay. So this is something that can be expanded throughout the country. In addition, we're going to have RJ Institutes. These are designed for professional cohorts. There will be 2 per year, one in San Diego, one in Vermont. These are designed so that professionals in a field, so law enforcement, educators, social workers, can come and spend an intensive week, learn principles, learn practices involving restorative justice, and then take those back to their communities and implement them in their field of practice. Again, these are all going to be also evaluated. We're going to have performance evaluations and outcomes so that these things can be extrapolated out throughout the country. We envision being a hub of information and practices for people all around the United States. It's just such an exciting opportunity. So the last thing I'll just mention briefly, because I know time is of the issue here, I'd be remiss if I didn't say something about the tension and the violence right now in the United States involving racial discrimination. So I will just say that we are fortunate in that we have classes already this spring. Professor Latham taught police use of force in our advanced criminal law seminar. Right now, we have a colleague at the Vera Institute who is developing race, crimes, and restorative justice. That's going to be offered online this fall. So restorative justice is timely. It offers an opportunity for change in our criminal legal system. It offers us an opportunity to face our history and the systemic racial discrimination that exists in our country. And it also offers a process to begin to understand and a path forward towards healing and reparation. So I always like to say restorative justice offers hope and a way, and I'm particularly proud that we're really giving all of the tools and the knowledge to our students to move forward and really be part of that change in our country. So excited to have you here. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much. And so I'm not seeing any questions in the chat right now about the restorative justice program, but if you have questions that you think of as we go forward, please put them in there. Just let us know who you'd like to direct the question toward, but not seeing any, we're going to move on to Joe Brennan, the director of the Academic Success Program at Vermont Law School. And Joe, to just talk about a little bit about what academic success has been doing, and then I'll have about 3 or 4 questions for you that we received in advance if you don't address them during your remarks. Go ahead, Joe.
Great, thanks, Richard. So in academic success, we're really trying to reach out to be involved with as many students as possible as early as possible. So if you're not familiar with academic success does, we try to provide the skills that students need to succeed in all of their classes. And a big part of that is early repetitive interventions, and because law school is different from the type of learning that they had done previously. So to that end, we have had our Jumpstart program for several years, but a couple years ago, we doubled the size of that to make sure that all of our JD students, and we also began inviting students who wanted to come would be able to. This year, we're going to be offering that virtually. Also very involved with the 1Ls and the master's students from the time they start on campus. Workshops, individual meetings, and I've developed a class called Foundations of Legal Analysis, which about 10 of our students whose background might suggest that they would struggle in law school have a formal class where they work one-on-one, not only with either me or Rich, but also with the professors of their doctrinal courses. This past year, I taught contracts, and so I also incorporated a lot of the academic success principles of good IRAC writing, good briefs, good note-taking, good test-taking skills right into class, and also paired that with Foundations of Legal Analysis. We also have a preliminary bar at the end of the 1L year to show students we're going to be tested on the bar exam, because what you learn is not exactly how you're going to be tested on the bar. We want to expose people to multiple questions. We want to expose them to the essay questions and the MPT questions. For those of you who don't know, the MPT is a performance-based test that gives you actual factual scenario that you write a work product for. We've also teamed with legal writing to offer an MPT in legal writing too. We've kept up throughout the rest of the curriculum with them, both the masters till they finish and the JDs in their 2 and 3L year, to continue that support through one-on-one meetings. Last year, adding Richard Sala as the assistant director to increase our capacity, adding several ASP mentors who also serve as TAs in many classes, and offering a bar prep course, a 3-credit bar prep course in the last year called Bar Exam Skills and Tactics that almost 90 students registered for last year. And we've taken this step further too, realizing that it's tough taking the bar exam, and it's tough just with the substance, but then add on to that the stress of paying for this course and not having any structure. We created 2 courses. One, to take advantage of the fact that in Vermont, you're allowed to take the bar exam the semester before you graduate. So we let students take a full bar prep course that is taught and facilitated by several of our content experts at VLS in December, January, and February, leading up to the February bar. And that course pays for their bar course. Then they can take the bar in February and be admitted the day after they graduate. This summer, starting actually on Monday, is JEP, which live version of that course. Same idea, provide structure, provide payments, and provide an opportunity to have that cohort working with each other. Unfortunately, this summer we're going to be virtual because we can't be in person, and we're starting later than we initially anticipated because, for those of you following, all the bar dates have been pushed back. So the bar, which is normally in July, is in September. So we're trying to provide that support from before they come onto campus all the way through the end. And our goal is to get involved in as many ways as possible with as many students as possible.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. And we'll have what I'm going to do here, just so everybody who's on the call or trying to type out questions, we're going to go through the 7 different areas that we have opening remarks today. And then what I'll do is I'll head over to the group chat and start going through the questions at that point. So if you're not able to type like lightning, don't worry. Once we get through these initial opening remarks, I will come over to the group chat and start going through those questions as quickly as we can. So, Joe, we did. If we receive some questions in advance, I'll go through those here during the opening remarks piece, and then I'll save the group chat questions for afterward. The first question, Joe, that I have for you that we received in advance is, can you talk a little bit about the difference between first-time and ultimate bar passage rates, and who we report these to, and how that affects us, either in terms of our rankings or in terms of accreditation?
Absolutely. So first-time bar pass rate's exactly what it sounds like. Did you pass the bar exam the first time you took it? And it's a little bit more complicated because of the proliferation of the uniform bar exam. So now 38 some states have the exact same bar exam, but they have different passing scores. If I take them in Vermont, I need 170. If I'm right over in New York, I need a 266. If I'm in Alabama, I need a 260. And if Alaska, I need a 280. So you could get a 279 in Alaska and fail, and I could get a 260 in Alabama and pass. So even though it's the same test, there are some differences. The way we have to count you is the score you got in the jurisdiction where you were physically sitting. So a 269 in Vermont is a fail, even if it would have passed in New York and the student ultimately goes to New York. That's first-time pass rate. Reporting purposes, that's one that US News and World Report does look at a lot. The one that's most important for our accreditation and with the ABA used to be first time, but within the past year, they shifted that to be ultimate pass. Ultimate pass means that if you passed on your first time, you are an ultimate pass. If you passed, you have really 4 shots at it to be an ultimate pass. From the time you graduate, there's a bar exam in July, if you graduate in May, it would be July, February, July, February. If you graduate at a different time, it might shift and be February, July. But if you pass on any of those 4 times, you are considered an ultimate pass. And an example before where I got a 269 in Vermont, I might never take the bar exam again because I transferred it to New York. As soon as I'm admitted in New York, I am an ultimate pass. That's the number that's most important for our ABA certification. We need to be at 75% after 4 administrations. So really 2 years to get over that 75% mark for the ABA certification.
Thanks so much, Joe. And then the other question is, we received a question that asked whether or not our bar rates we consider that, or whether they were consistently low. Can you talk about whether how we've done at meeting the accreditation standard over your time here, and where you see us going forward? Sure.
We have been, so we report, it takes 2 years to get to the 75%. So for the class of 2020, for instance, who'll be, taking the bar this year, they would have this September, then all of 2021, and then February of 2022. We wouldn't report on them until until the following January, because it's always a year behind. So we don't officially on them until February of 2023. So the class that we just reported on this past year was the class of 2016, and we were in compliance. The class of 2018, we still have another administration to go, and we were already in compliance before our last time through that. So the class of 2018 is already above that 75% mark. Class of 2019, this is really the third time. There was February, but sometimes people sit out February and go to July. So this summer was going to be the really big chance that people had to take it again. Unfortunately, the bar is in a bit of chaos right now because for all those who took the bar know, it involves sitting in really large gathering places close to each other and traveling all over the country. So states are doing various things with that, and unfortunately it's still up in the air, as some states are changing their dates as we're going right now, which is making it very difficult. I've talked to many students who have decided to sit out this summer and wait till February. So I'm not sure how that's going to affect our increase to 2019 or our first time rates for 2020, because some people, depending on what changes happen, might just sit out. But so the news is we are in compliance. We're already in compliance for 2018, which is what we'll report on for this coming February of 2021. And then 2019, we wouldn't report on until February of 2022, and 2020 hasn't taken it yet.
Okay, thanks so much, Joe. I really appreciate it. I'm just watching the clock here, so without further ado here, I'm just going to go on to John Miller to talk a little bit about admissions.
Yeah, happy to provide a brief update on where admissions are. So as many of you know who've been attending these events over the years, the national law school enrollments nationally have been in decline since 2011 and has shown really little to no improvement, and this year is no exception. When we set our admission goals, they're based on the strategic priorities of the institution. And this year, one of those priorities was to invest in a more selective and higher credential class to improve our outcomes. And namely, we're talking about bar passage and careers. And this would also have the effect of improving our ranking and reputation. Another priority is to make investments in the infrastructure and the marketing of our online learning programs and increase enrollments in these programs. And our online programs offer immense value to a different type of student, non-traditional mid-career professionals, people who are seeking advancement or a job change, or students who are just simply not able to move to SoRo, like many of us have, due to life circumstances. So for our JD class, the goal this year was to enroll 130 students, and our current deposit count, I just pulled it up right before we started this call, is 128 students. So we're essentially right where we need to be for the JD class based on our strategic priorities. And the credentials of this class are quite strong, with a median LSAT score of a 152 and a GPA of a 3.22. And this median score is 2 points higher than last year's entering class. The selectivity of this class is at 65%. What that means is that 65% of those who apply are admitted. And this is the most selective class that VLS has admitted in over 10 years. For our on-campus programs, our master's programs, we're anticipating about 40 master's and LLM students. And for our online programs, I'm pleased to report that we did hit 145 total enrollments this summer, which is really great success to our marketing and enrollment and online learning teams in enrolling more online master's students. It's important to note a few things about this. The first is that the cycle is not over, and the numbers mentioned above are subject and likely will change a bit. Gone are the days when we would admit a class and be done by March. And I recall being at VLS going on 12 years now, that was about the first 2 years I worked at VLS. And at this point, we continue to process application and enroll students literally up into orientation. And for our online programs, we have 2 terms a semester, and term 2 in the fall goes into October. So we truly are a year-round school that is enrolling all the time. And the second important part of this is that we are in a global pandemic. This is an unprecedented situation, and it's a bit of a wild card for any institution of higher learning across this country right now. And I'm sure you've seen a lot in the news about how different schools are dealing with this. So far, VLS has actually fared quite well, in that our enrollments have not been significantly impacted. And in fact, we have seen an increase in our summer non-degree enrollments because we instituted a marketing campaign to advertise our virtual summer courses to other law and graduate students. And additionally, we've seen a lot of interest in our online degree programs, both for this year and next year. So our pipeline of students interested in taking online classes is quite strong. So that concludes just my brief update, but happy to answer questions as they come up, as I'm sure they will.
Thank you so much, John. We had 2 questions come in. I just want to address with you pretty quickly. We had more than 2, but you hit most of them in your remarks, so thank you for that. The 2 questions outstanding there are, can you talk a little bit about the demographics of the incoming class? And then if it's appropriate, I'm not sure if the number, I realize that the discount rate, for instance, it changes as we, are waiting to see whether students are going to show up, but we did receive a question about, what is our discount rate? Is it sustainable? So the demographics of the incoming class and the discount rate.
Yeah, definitely. Well, the demographics are pretty much the same as they always are at Vermont Law School, as many of you came to VLS from very different places. They're students from all over the country, and they're from all different undergraduate universities and come with all different types of backgrounds. And we're always a little bit of an older class, typically between 25 and 27, when most law schools are around 23. And that's just the breadth of experience and that people come with to VLS. In terms of the diversity of the class, it's still quite good. Now, typically when you do shrink your class and have higher credentials, you do sacrifice diversity, but I'm happy to report that we also instituted an aggressive scholarship strategy, especially for minority students, and our diversity is holding right now at about 23%. That is down a little bit from last year, but that's significantly up or the same as it's been for the last several years. So we're happy about that, but there's always more to do there. And like I said, the cycle is not over. In terms of the discount rate, so as one of the strategic priorities to enroll a higher quality class, you need to increase your scholarships. The other thing that you're doing is you're raising your 25th percentile. To give you a little bit of a sense on that, the 25th percentile last year was 145. This year, it's going to be a 148. That's a significant increase. And in terms of the sustainability of that, funding for scholarships from alumni would be an amazing opportunity for us to be sustainable in that. I'll just throw that pitch out there, but it does require an investment from the school. As most schools, in terms of the downturn in the national market, schools had some options here, and a lot of schools chose to invest in their classes, which would maintain the quality. For VLS, it's difficult because we don't have a university, so it requires investment to do so, whether that funding comes from VLS related revenue generation from other programs, or whether it comes from scholarships and donations. But it's a good question, and it's one that we're going to have to figure out.
Thanks so much, John. Just a quick housekeeping note here. I see that some of our staff and faculty are answering questions in the chat, and that's great. It'll allow us to get through more questions here towards the tail end of the town hall. I will stay on and afterwards, and I will read those questions onto the recording, so that people who are watching this later on are able to, if they're not able to see the chat, they can hear those questions. So when I get to the question section, if the question has been answered there in the chat, I'll move on past that one, but I will put these on the recording so that people later on are able to see the responses to those questions. So thank you, John, very much. And I think from there, we're ready to move on to engagement. And I think we're going to hear from Brooke.
Thanks, Richard. In terms of engagement, you're talking about alumni engagement this year, or a fundraising overview?
I think most of the questions I have are about fundraising, but any remarks that you'd like to add about alumni engagement, and I could see Christopher giving me the thumbs up there, are absolutely welcome.
Sure. So in terms of overall fundraising, we are not unlike other institutions of higher education right now. So our giving from individuals, both unrestricted and restricted giving from individuals, is down. We're at about 85% of our annual fund goal. So we have about $90,000 more to reach that goal for about 2 more days left in our fiscal year. But the good news is that our fundraising from grants is up. We're about 185% of our goal this year in our grant revenue, which is wonderful. Our participation from our alumni is at about 7.8% this year. Last fiscal year, it was about 8.2%. So what we're hoping is that alumni will be inspired to give the next couple days before the end of our fiscal year. And we actually only need 35 more alumni to make gifts before June 30th to meet and then exceed our participation rate from last year. So that's the real focus. And I know Christopher's opening remarks was really driving that. Participation is 100% very important to the institution. Not so much the amounts at this point, but we really want to get that participation rate up. We did launch, when the pandemic started this year, a COVID-19 hardship fund, which we saw wonderful response to. We had over 100 donors give about $60,000 to that fund, which is amazing. 55% of our donations came from alumni, 21% came from faculty and staff, and 10% of those donations came from trustees, and about 14% came from others, so friends, parents, and former trustees. We were able to award 65 requests from students, totaling about $55,000, and we awarded 4 staff requests for funding to the tune of about $3,300. So when you look at that, that need that was filled by our alumni, faculty, staff, students, it was an amazing endeavor, and we're still fundraising for that fund as well. For the alumni engagement piece, I think it was back in the fall, an actual alumni engagement committee was formed that resides within the alumni board committee structure, and it's just 100% on alumni engagement activities. And they've launched 2 initiatives recently. One is their virtual webinar series, of which this is a part of. And another is a book club, a virtual book club. And so if you haven't heard about our 2 engagement activities, stay tuned, keep reading Swanvine, and you'll be able to see all those opportunities advertised in the monthly e-newsletter. So,
great, thank you so much, Brooke. And we did have 2 questions in advance. I think they were both really questions for the dean, although Brooke, if you have comments, you obviously are welcome. But the the questions to the dean were, what are you doing in your capacity as dean and president to pursue fundraising opportunities? What opportunities have been secured, and what opportunities do you see on the horizon? And I think you're muted, Dean McHenry.
Can you hear me now, Richard? Yep.
Yes, I can.
Great. Thank you. Before I respond to that great question, let me recognize two people who were on the phone with us. The first is Max Kempner, the 5th Dean of Vermont Law School. And I know that well, Max, because yesterday I awarded the Max Kempner Award to Ray Carre for his work at the school. And we're delighted to have you with us. The other person I want to recognize is Jeannie Shields, the spouse of Jeff Shields, must have been 17 of Vermont Law School. And we're so happy to have you with us, Jeannie, and see your big smile there. So we hope you're feeling well, and you're going to come visit us soon. And finally, I just want to thank all the alumni who were on the call with us. We really miss having you here. We'd all be going up to Killington in the gondola tonight, hopefully avoiding the lightning storm we had last year, which marooned some of us at the top of the mountain. But it's beautiful here. It's green. It's been very dry spring, but the White River is running low but clear, and lots of people are tubing in it and splashing around. And hopefully we will get to see you here next year with the classes at that time. The answer on fundraising is, of course, we're fundraising everywhere we can. Someone put a note into the chat. Is it true that alumni participation is only at 8%? That is a sad fact. Most law school fundraising at other law schools is in the low teens. Brooke and I would love to see that number doubled and get up into the mid to high teens. But that means all of you contributing, and as Christopher said earlier, it is not the amount, it is the participation. And when we raise money from foundations and grants, they always want to know what our participation rate is. So whether your gift is $5 or $5 million, it's just important that you make a gift. You should also know that 98% of the money that law schools raise around the country, I've done a lot of research on it, comes from the alumni base, not from other sources. We're somewhat special. In fact, we may lead the nation in the percentage of money we receive from a programmatic standpoint. Brooke indicated that we're running at 185% of our projection, but we raise almost 20% of our annual budget from foundation grants and government grants. Stephanie Clark earlier mentioned the Restorative Justice Grant, thanks to Senator Leahy's office. We have also received significant funding from the Grace Communications Foundation for our agriculture programs, and we just received a grant literally last week from the U.S. Department of State for our U.S. Asia program of $1.3 million. But however, the core of our fundraising is really rests with you, the alumni. And Richard, are we going to cover any issues on systemic racism and injustice? Do you want me to cover that briefly now?
No, we're going. Yes, we are going to cover it. We're going to hold it for our final topic. So I think right now we'll just provide the answer for this question and move on, and then we'll hold off till the end.
Great. I'm all done.
Okay. Awesome.
Thank you.
All right. I think now we're ready to hear from Jenny Russell about the environmental programs.
Great. Thank you. The goal as I see it for our environmental programs is to keep our program on the cutting edge of environmental law and where the field is now and where it's going. And so it's all about what is environmentalism today, how is it different from what it was when the field started, and are we keeping up with where we need to go for what the world will look like when our students get out and practice environmental law and policy. So a few of the changes that we've made to the program in the last few years reflect that, as well as our focus on delivering the subject matter that our students want for the careers that they want, helping them get the context that they need to do that. So one major development we had this year was that we joined forces with the National Wildlife Federation and made our environmental clinic a partner of that organization, so that we are essentially in-house counsel for that national environmental organization, which is very exciting. We also rebranded that clinic, which was formerly the Environmental and Natural Resources Law Clinic, as the Environmental Advocacy Clinic, in an effort to make it a little less unwieldy of a name and give it a bit of a facelift. And we have increased enrollment in that clinic. We've increased press coverage for the work of the clinic. And we brought in a new director for that clinic, Jim Murphy, who received an LLM from VLS. He is the nationwide director of legal advocacy at National Wildlife Federation. And so he has that dual role with NWF and as director of our clinic and professor at Vermont Law School. So that has been great, and Jim is just a phenomenal addition to our community. We also started another new clinic, the Environmental Justice Clinic. And we brought in Professor Marian Engelman-Lotto, who we lured up from Yale to create and lead that clinic. And it has been hugely successful, just students chomping at the bit to take the clinic, bursting at the seams. And it's been a wonderful experience. It's different from our environmental advocacy clinic because that clinic is strictly focused on litigation. It always has been, and we continue to do it that way in honor of Pat Parento's vision, and with a heavy focus on natural resources and wildlife. The Environmental Justice Clinic uses more of all the tools in the toolbox method for practice, representing communities where the communities take the lead on the changes they want to see. And we use whatever tools help us to do that, whether it be policy, litigation, supporting community organizing, coalition work. And so it's a different model of advocacy and something that our students have long wanted and are very happy to have. And we also have found it to be tremendously helpful from an admissions and recruitment standpoint with students. We also hired our first ever dedicated communications staff person for the environmental program. Her name's Molly McDonough. She's phenomenal. And we have revamped our publications. We have a new podcast that's just about a year old now called Hot House Earth. And we've had many thousands of downloads. I think last time I asked, which was a while ago, it was well over 6,000 downloads of episodes for that podcast. The latest one is on farm workers, essential yet unprotected. And when I'm done here, I'll put a few links in the chat for where you can find the podcast and some.
Oh, I think Jenny froze up there a little bit. But what we'll do is wait for Jenny to come back on, and once she comes back on, we'll have her continue. While we're waiting, the next topic to address, and if we could just keep this topic to about 2 minutes, I want to save as much time as possible for the final topic, but is to make some remarks about finances. So I think, is this going, Lorraine, are you going to be addressing this issue?
Hi, Richard. No, I think we're going to lead off with Constance Neri, and she is an alumni as well as the current chair of the Finance and Investment Committee.
Great, Constance, then I'll pass it off to you, and then Jenny, if you're back on, we'll come back to the environmental programs once we finish finances here.
Sure. Welcome everybody, and I've appreciated listening in on everything. There's so much to be excited about at the law school, so it's great to hear all these reports. From the board perspective, we remain very focused on financial sustainability of the institution. As everybody knows, I'm an alum from 1989, and I can remember the conversation at that point in terms of the law school's tuition dependence, highly tuition dependent, which we continue to be. And given the current dynamics across all of higher education, but for law schools in particular, there are fewer students that are coming to law school. And so being a highly tuition dependent institution with a pipeline that is feeling some pressure, that does create issues for us. And also having, we got to some of the fundraising and the giving issues, but having a relatively small endowment as well just means that we have to be very careful with the investments we make and the way that we're spending our money. So over the last several years, we've been very attentive to costs, reducing costs where we can. And as all of you know, a couple of years ago, we had to do a restructuring of our faculty and academic programs. So we've had to make some very tough decisions to maintain financial sustainability. And I'm happy to report that over the last couple of years, what this has meant is that we have run budget surpluses to the tune of, I think in the last 2 years, we've been able to put over $5 million into our reserves. And what this means is going forward, it just increases sustainability, certainly in the short term, but we continue to look at the long-term picture for the law school, where this is something that the Budget and Finance Committee, or the Finance Investment Committee, sorry, continues to look at and study. The commitment of the board toward financial sustainability right now is very much focused with a strategic planning effort. Again, looking at our programs, looking at our enrollment, what we can expect, but where are the appropriate places to make program investments, and what can we expect into the future, and what do we want to be in the future? Where do we want the law school to go into the future? So all I can really say here is that the board is very much focused on financial sustainability. The finance committee itself is one that it's a very diverse skill sets coming to the table to look at the financial issues of the institution. Very hardworking. We probably meet 8 to 10 times a year, looking at both short-term and long-term finances for the school. Lorraine, I don't know if there's anything else that you'd like to comment on. I'd certainly invite you to, but we are very, we've instilled a lot of discipline around the budgeting process, and the administration has been fantastic in responding to that. And as I said earlier, that has meant for the last 2 years, we have run budget surpluses, which is great news for us.
Thank you so much, Constance. And Lorraine, did you have any quick remarks before we turn to our final topic? I just want to make sure we're trying to stay on schedule here.
No, I'm good with it, but I just wanted to say quick hello to Jeannie Shields and Max Kempner. And Tom may have some remarks, though, so see if he does.
Great, thank you. Before I pass it off to the Dean, Jenny, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Awesome. Did you have any thing you wanted to add? I mean, you were doing a great job before the interwebs closed you down.
Thank you. I'm so sorry about that. Yeah, I think I covered a lot of what I wanted to say. I'll just wrap up by saying that we're in growth mode in the environmental program. I mean, we've as was noted before, we've got got great grant funding going on. We've had good success with that the last couple of years. We're growing our curriculum. We offered 2 new classes this summer that are very exciting. A class on environmental crimes taught by the Chief of Environmental Crimes from the U.S. Department of Justice, which has just been incredible, and a class on clean transportation. And so, the fact that we are blessed and work hard at grant funding has meant that we have been able to maintain a really strong environmental program, and we're completely committed to it.
Great, thank you so much, Jenny. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tee up our last topic for today, and then I know we're going to run a little short on time, but anybody who can stay for a couple of extra minutes and field a few of these questions, it would be great. But I want to turn us towards a conversation that started at the very beginning of our program, at the beginning of our town hall today, with comments from Stephanie Clark, and then I want to turn a little bit here towards one of the questions that we received from our alumni prior to today's town hall. And here's the question: what is Vermont Law School doing to ensure that all graduates leave Vermont Law School prepared to contribute to addressing systemic racism and institutional discrimination? And I think there's a broader question in terms also of, but a more narrow question in terms of our school, which is what are we doing? How are we focused on addressing issues of diversity here at Vermont Law School? And I think with that, I'll turn it over to Dean McHenry to talk about these topics.
Well, Richard, can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And you're asking an incredibly important question. I'll divide my answer into the successes, 3 parts: the successes we had so far, the efforts that we're currently making, and all the things we need to do. And I hate to say that all the things we need to do are much larger and much more important. But I think we should reflect upon the fact that Vermont Law School is today a much more ethnically diverse school than it was in its early years. Our diversity rate, students of color in the entering class last fall, was more than 30%, which is extraordinary and is much better than most other law schools. And we are looking at 21, 22% diversity rate in the entering class coming to us this fall. It's also a class that is balanced in terms of gender, although women have predominated over men over about the last 7 to 8 years. Our LGBTQ population has steadily increased based on self-identification, and of course Gala, which remains the signal social event of the season at Vermont Law School. And students who are first generation college, first generation attending law school. And I think many of you already know that the person responsible for the tremendous growth and recruitment of students of color at Vermont Law School is Dean Shirley Jefferson, who is here with us in the red sweater or shirt and has the best lighting and background of anybody who's on Zoom. Dean Jefferson has played a tremendous role in that. We do not, so that is something that we can be very appreciative of. And we have a number for alumni to know, we have a number of affinity groups of various affinity groups at our law school, which are supported. We have not been as successful in the recruitment of faculty members of color. We gave job offers to 2 faculty members of color over the last several years, and both turned us down. Vermont remains the 2nd whitest state in the nation, next to Maine, despite being a very progressive state, and I think in some ways a welcoming state. That's hard for our students of color, although one advantage of being a very small state and a very small community is people get to know you as individuals. And Jamison Davis, who I think Brooke mentioned had given her directions of the school campus, was elected 2 years ago to the select board of the town of Hartford, which is where White River Junction is, which has been terrific. And many of our students of color end up falling in love with Vermont when they're here and staying here, and Vermont greatly appreciates the diversity that we provide. We do inherent bias training for our student, staff, and faculty. We do a variety of programs. We have an absolutely terrific Martin Luther King program every year, and a month-long Black History celebration. But we have so far to go as a society, as a legal academy, and as a law school, and we are looking forward to some of the things we're going to be working on over the course of this summer. I will say we get tremendous support from the judiciary in Vermont Chief Justice Reiber is very supportive of our students of color and our diversity programs, and makes a point of highlighting those. So I'll stop there, Richard, and just say that one of the great things about our school is our students, and they keep us honest, they push us, and we really appreciate that.
Thank you so much. And so I'm just going to take a couple of quick minutes here, Christopher, if it's all right, to go through some of the chat questions before I pass it off to you to close out. Now, some of these I can see were answered here, but I'm just going to go through them, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes or less if you can. And the first one was, when do you, and this is clearly a question for Stephanie Clark, which is, when do we expect the Restorative Justice Institute to be operational?
Sure. So the Restorative Justice Institutes are the 2 educational training programs for professional cohorts, and the first one is targeted for January of 2021. It is likely that will be a virtual event, and then the second one will be in the summer. We anticipate they'll be every 6 months. So the one in the winter would normally be in San Diego, and the one in the summer will normally be in Vermont, obvious reasons.
Great, thank you so much. And I think the next question is for you also, and I'm just going to read it right off the chat there, which is, what, if any, linkages are there with the design of the restorative justice program for potential students who might come from deeply oppressed, marginalized communities? This is with a particular eye toward Black potential students in urban and rural centers, question mark.
So I will say that, we have a diverse population in the Master of Arts and Restorative Justice program, and particularly with the students that are in the online classes, because they're all over the country. In terms of specific linkages, we're doing our best to always talk about affordability and access, because we think restorative justice is something that really does need to be available to anyone and everyone. But the opportunities to do that in terms of how we attract people as students is different than how we present that information, for example, through citizens academies and training. So that's something that we're really looking to expand in terms of the work under the grant itself. And of course, we're always looking to improve the diversity within our program as well. I don't know, does that answer that specific enough?
I think it's a good answer, but if it wasn't for the person who asked, please just hit the chat again and we'll give it another shot. I think the next question is for a good question for probably John, which is, can you, I think you touched on this, but can you just break down the numbers on our programs? How many JD students do we have? How many online students do we have a sense of that? And is that mix that where we are right now what we think is the right mix for sustainability in the future? Hopefully that question makes sense.
Yeah, I think Tom answered a little bit, but if you're looking at not just incoming, but total, so we'll focus on that. VLS has about 650 students total. In terms of the JD population, including our JD and joint JD Masters populations, is about 450 students. Our on-campus Master is around 50 to 60 students a year, and they're one-year students, so they're cycling out every year. And then our online-only students, this is based on last year's numbers, because we have those already set at a certain census point, so it's just a little bit easier to describe. It's about 116 online-only masters and certificate students, and we already know this year we've expanded that. In terms of the right mix, I think that's an institutional strategic plan question, right? About moving forward and what does the school want to achieve. As I mentioned earlier in my report, if the goal of the school is to increase the LSAT and GPA credential quality of the class by shrinking it with a higher discount, well, that's going to have to be made up in other ways, whether that's development focused or whether that's revenue initiative focused through other areas that VLS can expand its mission, whether that's through the restorative justice program, the environmental programs, or different types of areas that VLS can develop credentials that would both expand our mission, increase the population of students that we might appeal to, and offer something of value, whether that's skills-based learning, self-paced learning, more online programs, more master's programs, different types of institutes, etc. So I can't answer that question on whether it's sustainable or not. It really depends on the institutional objectives, and as we come out of this strategic planning process, what that ultimately is going to look like for VLS as we move forward. my personal opinion is that there is a really amazing opportunity for VLS to be on the forefront of a number of issues, including how we think about credentialing and how we think about creating educational opportunities within our mission that could help people advance in their life and thinking about lifelong learning and more affordable, accessible credentialing beyond JD and master's programs.
Constance, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? Just on the question of our current mix and where we, in our different programs and where we think we're heading.
Yeah, no, I think John has covered it very well. And I think about VLS and just its history as an innovator. And I think this law school was started in the mid 1970s with a focus on environmental law when no one else was doing that. And I just can't, I'm amazed again, here's VLS doing it again with restorative justice, coming at a time that is so utterly perfect. That I think that's very, very exciting. And I think coming out of the strategic planning process, there are a lot of other ideas in terms of what could be future focus areas for VLS, drawing on our current competencies. And so I just expect VLS has a history of, I think, being on the right issues at the right time. And given the robust discussions that are occurring in the strategic planning process, I expect that to continue to be the case. So sort of hats off to VLS generally, hearts, minds, everything is always seems to be in the right place.
Thank you so much. And our participation rate here is holding pretty steady. So I'm going to keep powering through these questions for a little bit longer. And this comes back to a question back to Stephanie Clark. Will the RJ Institute be able to respond to requests from organizations to provide specifically designed institutes tailored for a profession or problem sector? I think the question here is really about whether we can provide custom programming to people who reach out for that kind of learning environment.
Yeah, and the creation of the RJ Institutes is actually sort of augmenting off of something that's already happening with our partner at the University of San Diego, David Karp, because he already does specialized trainings for specific organizations that reach out to him. So yes is the answer. We definitely want to see the RJ Institutes get tailored to organizations, and they can certainly reach out to us to create something for their particular organization. The other thing we could do is hold them as special events, individually. That's not something that we have to wait to have just at the RJ Institute. And then eventually what we'd like to do is have multiple tracks, and we'd like the institutes to grow and become something that we could be doing multiple things for different cohorts at the same institute.
Great, thank you so much, Stephanie. Joe, I see you answered this question, but since we're here, I'm just going to give us another chance to address it. And I think really, if I was going to sum this question up, the question is COVID going to provide us with an opportunity? And is VLS advocating for a replacement or a bar exam process that doesn't unduly or inequitably expose students to harm?
And to the answer is yes. I'll combine this with a follow-up question asked, because my first would talk mostly about Vermont, but the other said other states too. So yes, we are trying to do anything and everything to help our students. I'm of the mind that the bar, even in a normal year, isn't a great way of determining and measuring somebody's skills as an attorney, but especially when you can't sit next to each other, you're sitting in a house with the library, family members are sick, they're changing the dates on you. I think that it's unconscionable that states are trying to move forward, some in July, going with dating students like that. And the school's response has been strong with that. We have advocated for, we've all had discussions with Vermont to re-examine the admissions process. The National Conference of Bar Examiners is undergoing it right now, taking a hard look at it. But for this summer, COVID specifically, we increased the number of students that we are letting be in that bar course I talked about for students over the summer. That's not just for Vermont, that's for any uniform bar state. Again, the hardship fund, which I mentioned earlier, to students whose plans have been thrown askew by having their date change or their jurisdiction change. We have advocated for Vermont specifically. We've offered Vermont literally our entire campus if they need additional space to host the bar. And they, if they are going forward with it, they are working with us on that. Other states have explicitly said we're not doing it outside of our state borders. We've also worked with the Vermont Supreme Court and the Vermont Bar to discuss options such as diploma privilege or relook the score of the bar exam. And we've signed on to letters. New York is by far our second highest jurisdiction. Vermont and New York, we're all over the country, but those two, especially now with UB, are our biggest. So we signed on to a letter advocating for changes to the New York as well. So we're trying to do everything we can to advocate for our students. And it's frustrating because there's information we can't give them because the state done it yet. But so yes, and as Richard mentioned, this is an opportunity to I hope states take this as an opportunity to relook at the bar in a more broad view and see how can we do this better, because it's not the right way to do it.
Thanks so much, Joe. I'm going to field 3 more questions, Christopher, and then I'm going to pass it off to you. So the next question actually is for Jenny Rushlow, and you touched on this a little bit here in the chat, but just there was a question about the land use clinic, how it ties into the environmental programs, and you know, they clearly the alumni have mentioned the value, the different ways that you can use this, you know, as a practice area. How are you seeing land use in the environmental programs in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a priority. And one thing I will say is that we currently do land use work in all of our clinics and centers. I mean, from the siting of renewable energy projects to preserving farmland for use by farmers, to Act 250 cases in the environmental advocacy clinic, and more in the environmental justice clinic. So we are already doing a lot around land use, but I think we could do a better job of talking about that. We did used to have a land use clinic and center, and or center at least, and we don't anymore. It kind of, I think the funding dried up, but I actually just had a conversation yesterday with our development team about working on bringing that back. So it is a priority right now. I agree. You know, in the comments, it was noted how this is such an important issue from an economic development and justice, racial justice perspective. And I absolutely agree. I also think it's an area that has great opportunity for jobs for our students. And I saw that firsthand in my career. So point well taken, and we're working on it.
Thank you so much. So we have 2 more questions here. I'm gonna turn to Ed's question here, and then I'm gonna wrap up with Tamara's question before I pass it over to Christopher. And Ed's question was, he heard mention of strategic planning. Can anyone give an overview of what's going on, timetable, who's participating, what does our strategic planning process look like? And I think probably this is going to be a question for the Dean and President.
Great, yes. And if Glenn Berger, our board chair, class of 78, was with us, he could do an even better job of answering the question. We have a trustee committee that is working on strategic planning. And Constance Neary, who you just heard from a moment ago, has contributed her substantial knowledge on our budget and finance issues. That committee has met with the staff advisory committee, with the faculty advisory committee, is going to meet again with the staff as a whole, and then in smaller groups with the faculty over the course of this summer, and is comprehensively looking at a variety of strategies for the school going forward, building on a successful strategic planning effort that was launched under the direction of then trustee Brian Dunkiel, who chaired that committee at the board level back in 2015 or 2016. So stay tuned. We'll have some more information on that, Richard.
And then I think for our last question here from Tamara, and I think it's a great question, what will VLS do to institutionalize diversity, equity, and inclusion so that it doesn't depend on one incredible advocate, which clearly she's referring to Dean Shirley Jefferson, who has been an incredible advocate. So I'll turn this over to the Dean, and I'll just finish up with a note from Tamara, just in case you can't see it. It says, it's everyone's responsibility and should be a part of all targets as a measure of success. And with that, I'll turn it over to the Dean, who will then turn it over to Christopher Smith.
Great. Well, Tamara, thank you for that question, because I think it's an excellent one. And actually, Dean Jefferson can tell you that one of the things she and I talked about back in March, and that was before some of the great disparities in our society were once again revealed to us, that she has taken very much a laboring oar, and sometimes as an institution, we have not followed her lead or allowed her to be to absorb a heavier load, and that's not fair to the school. It's not fair to our mission of social justice, diversity, and inclusion. Fortunately, there is a very strong support for increased diversity within the faculty and within the staff, and certainly within our student body. So I don't want to make any promises at this point. I want to make sure we have actual specific planning, but we are going to be doing both reporting and planning on diversity this fall, and stay tuned, because Dean Jay and I have more to tell you about that. We look forward to working on it. And Tamara, we look forward to your involvement too. Richard, I'm sorry, I wanted to add one more thing. You know, one of the things that our alumni can do for us, if they are diverse alumni, if they work with, hopefully, in diverse communities, is you can steer diverse students our way, and we do a lot of recruiting in that area. You can support diverse students and all of our students as alumni by serving as mentors, and you can reach out to Abby Armstrong and Monica Collins for master's students in the Office of Career Services. You can employ them in externships and internships. You can reach out to Nicole Killeran and Beth Locker in our internship program to assist them. You can hire them, and you can steer people in our direction so they have some understanding of all the great work that we do. Dean Jefferson pointed out to me a month ago that the best thing that Vermont Law School does to fight institutionalized racism and police brutality is train diverse lawyers and all lawyers with the skill set to actually do something about those issues. And that's something that I hope we will continue to improve on. So thank you, Richard. I guess back to Christopher.
And Christopher, just real quick, I'm sorry, I'm going to interject real quick. We did get two last questions. I'm just going to ask if Betsy and Cynthia could just put in the chat there a response to the question of how is staff morale and how is faculty morale given everything going on. And while you're putting those answers in the chat there, then with that in place, I'll turn over to Christopher Smith.
Thank you, Richard. And thank you, everybody who participated from the faculty, administration, and staff. I acknowledge that with the school closed, technically you spent your first day of a vacation with alumni. So thank you so much for taking the time to do that. Thank you to alumni who tuned in and who submitted questions, as well as the 12 alumni who made gifts during the time of this call. Any future we envision for Vermont Law School is contingent upon the moral and financial support of its alumni. And so, as Brianna Weaver, JD class of 2017 and member of the board of the Alumni Association said, it's better that we receive $5 from 10 alumni than $50 from one alumni. So that when Brooke and Dean McHenry and the trustees are out there trying to secure those grants and those big donors, they can say, look at how much our alumni support us as well. And so I just ask again that you, if you are able, please go to connect.vermontlaw.edu and make a contribution today, whatever it is. And please encourage your fellow alumni to do the same. This conversation has been recorded, so it will go out on YouTube as part of the VLSAA webinar series. Also keep an eye out for information about our book club, which the book is written by a fellow alum. And if you have any questions for follow-up from today or about the VLSAA or giving to Vermont Law School, please don't hesitate to email alumni@vermontlaw.edu. Thank you all so much and have a great weekend.